I'm Scott Loveridge. I'm director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. I'm pleased to moderate this session today. Just a few ground rules. Your participants will interact via the chat, so I do welcome you to post any questions that you have for the presenters in the chat area of the webinar, and I will interrupt the presenters from time to time to call their attention to questions that you may have, and it seems to work pretty well. We've got a great webinar today, an interesting set of folks who are ready to present to us. Dave Ivan of Michigan State University works on statewide level for Michigan State University and has done a lot of work on small town, can small towns be cool, and small town success strategies. Norm Walser is his PhD in economics from the University of Illinois and has worked at Western Illinois University in a number of roles, including probably most relevant for this as director of the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs, and he's a recent retiree and still is quite active, currently editing a special issue of Community Development on the effects of community visioning programs, and also on innovative practices that support community change. Dr. Mark Peterson is a professor of community development with a cooperative extension service at the University of Arkansas, and really focuses on effectiveness in teaching leadership principles and skills to community leaders. He's the coordinator of the Breakthrough Solutions program, which is a partnership initiative committed to building healthy, sustainable communities and regions for the 21st century. Paul LaChapelle is an assistant professor in the political science at Montana State University Bozeman and serves as the Extension Community Development Specialist, and works with the local government center and provides a lot of support in community strategic visiting, local governments, leadership development training, and profiling. Dr. Mary Emery is a member of the Sociology Department at Iowa State University, and she conducts research related to community change and co-chairs the Great Plains IDEA multi-university online master's degree program in community development. She's been an active practitioner in this area for a long time. So with that, I'll turn it over to, I believe we're going to start with Dave Ivan. Dave, could you start?
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for those of you in the Eastern Time Zone. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to join my colleagues from a number of different institutions to share with you some of the learned approaches that we've identified as part of a North Central Region Center for Rural Development funded project. Our agenda today really takes us down a couple of different paths. First, I'm going to start us off sharing with you what some of the more recent scholarship is relative to community change. Those that have studied it, what have they found? And then from there, I'm going to transition into Norm Walser, who's going to then share with you specifically what our project found, looking at some of the successful community change initiatives from the United States that we studied through our NCR-CRD grant. We're then going to take a deeper dive. Mark Peterson from the University of Arkansas is going to share his program, Breakthrough Solutions, their approach to trying to facilitate community change with the communities that he's working with. And then after Mark, Paul LaChapelle from Montana State is going to share with you the successes and the learnings that they've identified through the Horizons program that he coordinates there in Montana. Lastly, Mary Emery from Iowa State is going to kind of stitch it together in terms of, all right, we have these various approaches. What does it mean? Where do we kind of go from this as practitioners that are involved in community change, depending on our specific role, and how do we implement these community change approaches in our everyday work? But what I'd like to do is start out with a better sense in terms of who's on the audience. So Scott, if we could bring up poll number 1. And what we're asking is for you to just identify yourself if you work in extension, if you are part of the field, if you're based on campus, if you're with a state agency, or if you're representing a community development practitioner. Okay, it appears that the majority of you work in the field with extension as an extension educator. We also have about a third of you that are campus-based faculty, staff, and then also some community development professionals. That's helpful in terms of as we try to share with you some of the strategies that we've learned in terms of your perspectives. And hopefully, again, this will be an engaging webinar, although technology limits some of the engagement, obviously. But we encourage you, as you have questions, perhaps insights to share on your own work, to type them into the chat. And we'll keep an eye on that chat as we move forward to again, involve your thoughts in community change approaches. So Scott, if I can have you, thank you very much. So I want to start in terms of informing you or sharing with you actually two very recent community change research reports. One is from the Aspen Institute, and it's a project entitled Voices in the Field number 3. This is the third of a series of research projects that they have been working on. It was completed in late 2010, this past fall. The PDF is here, but it really talks about what are some of the common approaches that they've learned based on examining 48 comprehensive community change initiatives over the 20 years. Secondly, I want to share some information from the Tamrick Institute for Community Engagement. Some of you may not be familiar with the Tamrick Institute. They're a Canadian-based organization. I kind of compare them very similar to the Heartland Institute here in Nebraska and the States. Their recent project specifically kind of looked at community change indicators. Those of us that are involved in working with communities to add vitality, to reduce poverty, whatever the specific goals are, we often struggle in terms of how do we measure our impact. Are there some common approaches that perhaps all of us should consider as we move forward? And so I'm going to be drawing from some of their information as well, and here's a link to their particular report that kind of helped to inform our study as well. But let me begin with the Aspen report, if I may. And what they found was really there was 5 community change dimensions that they identified of the 48 programs that they studied that appeared most commonly. The first key lesson was that there was a clarity of mission with these approaches. The desired outcomes, the operating principles were in line. And what the report talked about is that all the actors really agreed on what the key purpose of the work was and moving forward. Very important in terms of if we're going to try to initiate some community change approaches in the community, that everybody's on the same page. Secondly, what the Aspen report found was that there was an intentionality in action. And what the report suggests is that where the intervention is intentional in their programming efforts, they actually improve their outcomes. So it's important to, again, make sure that everybody's on the same page, and then we all understand what our specific roles are. The third key finding that they found was that the process included assessing and building capacity. And what I mean by that, or what the report suggests by that, is that the goals are really assessed in light of actual, not the desire, but the actual capacity to implement that. And when that capacity was weak, there was really 2 options. They could either scale back what they were trying to accomplish, or say, how can we build the necessary capacity to be successful? The fourth common goal that they found with success was part of capacity building is essentially effectively managing community partnerships, collaborations. I think all of us who work in community change understand this one explicitly. You know, community change efforts involve really a complex web of relationships, whether it be residents, funders, intermediaries, neighborhood organizations, public sector agencies, private sector, consultants, other. It's a complicated web, all with differing interests, different cultures, differing backgrounds, different ways of approaching problems. And so what the Aspen report found was that the successful efforts literally, and they used the word metaphorically, subsidized the relationships of these various sectors until new habits of thinking, acting, and collaborating occurred naturally. And I think that's important. Collaboration doesn't always happen naturally. And so what the Aspen report suggested is that if we're going to be successful, sometimes we have to kind of hold people's hands until they become more of a natural desire among all the actors. And lastly, what the Aspen report talked about is that throughout the process there's continuous learning and adapting. And what the report suggested is that it's important to solicit the opinions and the priorities of a multiple group of stakeholders and developing those key evaluation questions early on in the process. And doing so really cultivates a ownership of the process and this is important, and a likelihood that the results are going to be relevant to what you hope to accomplish. You know, I think that evaluation thing is so important in terms of as we try to measure what we're doing in community change. And really the Tamarack project kind of took that to the next level, and they says, all right, as we look at some of these vibrant community change initiatives, what are some of the successful themes that we saw? How are they measuring what they're doing? Here's what they found. They said, first of all, they included a variety of different community indicators. It wasn't just one indicator to measure whether their intervention was successful. Rather, the successful programs chose to use a variety of different indicators to help them measure their success. Secondly, they tended to be holistic, both looking at the needs of the individual and the needs of the community. Okay? And so the indicators that they measured, if you're measuring vitality, perhaps looked at, for example, individual unemployment rates, but also unemployment rates from a community and regional basis as well. Thirdly, what they found was that nearly all of these community approach initiatives use standardized indicators rather than trying to create something on a community-specific level. Whether that be census data, whether it be other government available data. Creating from scratch, as we know, can be difficult. Having said that, you know, if these were common in all of them, there were some that actually deviated from them. And what they found, what this small number of approaches identified, was that most used national statistics, but then in some cases they tried to augment it with local communities. So that they were kind of making themselves relevant within a national context, but also at a community level. Secondly, less than half of those use subjective indicators. Indicators like people feel better, or their thoughts towards this were X. Again, they were very quantitative in their approach, and they felt that that was important, particularly in terms of trying to articulate their relevance to the funders who were funding the particular project. And thirdly, only a few approaches actually linked across sectors for the information. And then lastly, of the approaches that they studied, there was a dozen of them, only 4 of them were exclusively grassroots, and that they only looked at local data and not in the context of national data as well. So I wanted to share with you in terms of that recent scholarship, and then kind of transition in terms of our particular project. I think it's important to understand that we approach this differently. What the Aspen Institute did, what the Tamarack Institute did, was essentially sat back and looked at reports from a variety of different community change initiatives and then extracted common themes. Our approach was different. What we did was we brought in a group of actual organizers of community change, and we had a conversation. We had a discussion in terms of what is your approach, and then other project leaders can kind of react to their approach and have this kind of dialogue that hopefully identified, or we think identified, some of these successful approaches. Secondly, I think it's important to remember that our project and these other projects just represent one slice in identifying learned approaches. Each of you as practitioners, as people who are doing this program, understand that there are successful things that work. There are things that work and there are things that don't work. But I think as a practice, we can all learn from one another. But the important thing is that we step back and say, what did others learn? Hopefully that's what we're sharing with you today. And then thirdly, we hope that our information will help inform community change approaches. We feel that we've gone through a process here to identify some of these successful themes, and that will help guide those, particularly those that perhaps are new to community development, economic development activities, to help guide some of their actions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Norm Walser at Northern Illinois University, and Norm's going to specifically talk about some of the initiatives, or specifically about our particular program and some of the common elements that we identified. Norm?
Well, thanks, Dave. The project, as we conceived it, really had a number of different purposes. One was to verify what innovative practices were used and how the program deliverers really felt they made a difference. Another one was to identify from those discussions some commonalities that were among the programs, particularly both strengths and limitations in terms of causing effectiveness, both perceived by the participants in the programs as well as perceived by the people who are actually delivering the programs. The ultimate goal with the project as we conceived it, was to try to transfer some of our knowledge, or what we had learned, to other types of initiatives, both those that were currently underway, but also some of those coming down the pike. And with the recession particularly, I think it's a good time to be thinking about what do we need to do in the future to rebuild communities, to cause change, and what sorts of things are most likely to be effective. We experimented in a number of different settings, or some of these programs have had different settings, and we tried to figure out what kinds of activities really would be useful in the future as we look at these alternative economic developments and alternative types of approaches that are going to be used. And then ultimately, since a lot of us were actively involved in scholarship, tried to figure out how do we sort of get or enhance the dialogue that currently is going on. So having said that, let's move to some of the programs that we actually included in the discussions. And we tried to identify the program, or tried to group the programs into three main types. And I'd say at the beginning that this was not a long, exhaustive process of seeking out programs and trying to in some way rate them. This was pretty much trying to figure out some programs that were doing different kind of things, were doing them differently, and essentially seemed to have some significant success. So under the Community Visioning and Planning Initiative area, we had three programs, one being the mapping program at Western Illinois, one being Breakthrough Solutions, which you're going to hear about a little bit later on in Arkansas, and one was more of a national program, Strategic Doing, that's really trying to focus on more immediate outcome consequences. And then a second group of programs that we identified were to build entrepreneurship. And we had one in Wisconsin, a Community Progress Initiative, and the Exceed program in Missouri, which is focusing on, again, entrepreneurship and business development. And then Community Entrepreneurial Coaches Institute, which is, again, a little different approach, but it was looking at how to build the capacity in Kentucky to develop new businesses and help communities become more user-friendly or business-friendly. Then the third group of programs involved broader community capacity building, and this is the Montana Horizons program, which was focusing on trying to reduce poverty, the U-LEAD program, which in Minnesota, which was working primarily on building leadership development, and then the University of Wisconsin Center for Community and Economic Development, which had a broad range of activities where they were working with downtown development and just, a variety of different types of efforts. So these programs, we felt, kind of represented a group of activities that would kind of inform us in terms of how things were developing. We really worked in 5 major program phases. And one is, and these are, I guess, not real surprising, but we wanted to have some insight into preparing communities, what kind of program content they were going to have, different ways and innovative ways in which the programs were actually delivered. Then we wanted to know something about what kind of follow-up and support was provided afterwards and what seemed to be effective. And then finally, how you go about evaluating these programs, or how the programs had been evaluated from the perspective of the providers. So looking at the first phase, the preparing the communities, I think we learned a number of different things from the conversations. One was the importance of having the entire community understanding the expectations, to know what the program really was supposed to do, and have, in that respect, really a broad base participation. And especially, I think the concern was that we would have the groups that are typically overlooked now being represented. A second major thrust was to somehow build local leadership and build it early, or build a capacity early in the program, and particularly to support the leaders, especially those that were first-time participants. And there was a great deal of thought in a couple of the programs to making sure that those first-time participants and groups were in fact brought in and in fact made or helped to become leaders fairly early. Building networks was really important, promoting local buy-in and investment. But even broader than that, I think promoting ownership was something that was kind of a hallmark of several of the programs, and the program leaders felt were particularly important.
Norm, if I could interrupt you just a second and go back on that question. If you go back one slide, maybe the last two, second and third to last bullet items, I think are really important, given particularly this extension audience that is primarily on the line today. There's often a debate in extension about charging for programs, and people are often a little bit reluctant to do that. So that point about the local buy-in and investment and ownership is particularly relevant for this audience. Could you say a little bit about what are the signs of buy-in?
We had a number of different approaches used by the programs. One of them, for example, the mapping program in Illinois requires a local actual investment. I mean, so much money has to be put up in order to have the program come in. And several programs really involved those kinds of things. But I think the cash on the table is certainly one sign. I think the commitment by the people in terms of getting people vested on committees, willing to take leadership role. So community leadership and the investment part, I think, are two of the aspects. But the ownership part of it is maybe less kind of direct as much as it is, I think, the idea of people in the community sort of buy in. Used that word a couple of times, but people actually feel that the program is something that's going to help the community and something that's worth maintaining. And I think those were things that kept coming up in our conversations. In terms of the program content, the things that seemed to be really important among the program leaders that we talked with were that you maintain a really high quality program, and that particularly recognizes differences among communities. So it's not a one-size program fits all, but it really pertains to the community. But at the same time, it does not get drawn off into immediate kinds of issues. That it's really a longer term kind of program, and one that we're focusing on the long-term kind of issues. But an issue also that kept coming up was the fact that we need to recognize the difference between the program and the tendency to sort of deliver a program versus the process, which is getting people through the program as as well as building capacity, doing the various things that are necessary, and then the actual product, which may be a report or something like that. So there seemed to be a lot of discussion among the participants that this was important. We certainly wanted to have solid theoretical underpinnings, scholarship, build successful practices. These kinds of things were very important. Having a breakthrough philosophy to overcome local barriers was an important issue. Flexibility was mentioned a number of different times. And then finally, making the program a really important event in the community. And that leads back to the question about the concept of community ownership. We saw a number of different approaches in delivery. And I think the essential things that were coming up there were that you need to recognize and mobilize those assets very early, the community assets, and be able to build on them. And that leads back to the question of buy-in, leads back to investment and to making it a community event. Rewarding the risk takers, especially the new leaders, came up time and time again, that there's a risk to these folks to getting involved, and in fact we have to some way provide the support and the reward so that they don't in some way fail. Building a solid identity for the program, at the same time maintaining flexibility, so again we don't just offer quotes a program, but we're basically tailoring the program on the fly in some cases, but maintaining the solid mission of the program. Having a bold and an enjoyable delivery process was something that seems to be really important in Kentucky, and a lot of discussion was devoted to those kinds of activities. We wanted to make sure, or the people in the program seem to want to make sure, that participants do not feel like they have to wait to do something, that in fact as the program gets delivered, that the participants are basically working right away, getting things going, and particularly they're effectively communicating the process. In the fourth phase, measuring outcomes was really something that the program leaders discussed a number of different times, and I think varied in terms of how they do it. But the idea of being able to document to your clientele that in fact the program was working, was having some effects, even though it was a long-term kind of discussion, but it's still, you needed to somehow provide that accountability. And the idea of you picking the low-hanging fruit first, which is something that the Aspen Institute mentioned as well, but the idea of having some immediate successes was really important. Delivering a consistent follow-through and trying to keep the attention paid on the longer-term kind of questions rather than immediate sort of concerns. And the notion of maintaining resilience or trying to promote resilience in the community was something that seemed to be important. And then again, publicizing successes and making sure that people recognize that what was really important. I think as we look back on the program or the efforts that we've had thus far, it was particularly important that the communities are ready for the process. And it's not necessarily that it's just they want to do it, but in fact they're equipped to do it. So community readiness was important, and Minnesota had a particularly good program, Minnesota Extension, to talk about how to build community capitals and how to try to measure it in anticipation. So that's something certainly worth looking at. Incorporating the local potential of the region, the assets and various things, I think was really an important kind of question. The conceptual basis came up time and time again, that the program needs to be current, it needs to be solid, it needs to make sense in the delivery system. Having a high quality, innovative delivery, being able to get to different types of participants. A number of the programs, for example, are really focusing on social networking and trying to make sure that the young groups coming in the communities basically can communicate effectively, because that's, whether it's Facebook or other kind of things, that's really the avenue of communication that they like to pursue. And persistent follow-through came up, I think, so many times. So it's the notion of not just delivering the program, but then it's moving on. So where we're kind of moving with this, we obviously want to get the results presented in a number of different cases. We're working now on a special issue of the Community Development Society Journal. Sam Cordes and I are trying to edit. We're basically obviously trying to do this seminar and a series of seminars that Mary and others will talk about later on. We may go to a broader manuscript. When Sam and I did the call for abstracts, we had about 55 or 56 respondents, and there was a lot of good material there that we weren't able to use into special issues. So we'd like to look at doing something a little more more extensive than that. We certainly want to have more discussions with practitioners and broaden the range of practitioners that we're currently working with. We'd like to help people develop and modify programs based on what we've learned, and I think that's probably going to happen both within the groups that we've already been working with, but some inquiries that we've already had with some new people. We may try to expand the program a little bit internationally, and there are other similar kind of programs that are going on around the world. We'd sort of like to see what they have learned and then apply them back to U.S. communities and whatever. And we'd like to share the insights in different kinds of settings. I've provided a list of some more detailed information for the various programs that we're currently in our efforts, and we'll think that these would be well worth pursuing in some cases. And again, they all bring a different dimension to our discussion. So now we want to hear more from more about a program in Arkansas, the Breakthrough Solutions. And Mark Peterson is going to take us through those slides and talk a bit about what he's learned and how they might be applied to some of the other programs. So Mark?
Yeah, while Mark's getting started, I just would like to point out that Paul LaChapelle has posted some, looks like some very relevant material on this whole question of ownership and buy-in. So I would direct folks to take a look at the information that Paul has posted in the chat box. Good morning and good afternoon. This is Mark Peterson. It's a privilege for me to be a part of this conversation. These are great folks to work with, and I've learned a great deal from them. We're going to be talking about creating vibrant, sustainable communities and regions through breakthrough solutions. You probably know there are three kinds of people: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who don't know what happened. And the same thing is true of communities. There are communities who make things happen, communities who watch things happen, communities who don't know what happened. So we're going to talk about some tools and concepts where we can help communities make things happen. We're going to talk about the nature of change, leveraging assets, how to create breakthroughs, and share with you some incredible stories. The first question is, how does change happen? Does it happen incrementally or through major changes or breakthroughs? Thomas Kuhn did a great work called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He made a compelling case that within the science, things happen in major changes. There's a paradigm, a worldview of looking at things, and it's commonly held among most folks. As time goes on, anomalies accumulate, and at some point the paradigm shifts. Think of the worldview that the Earth was flat, and anomalies accumulated, and at some point the paradigm shifted. So he made a compelling case that this is how change happens in science. And when we interact with communities and have them identify their history and their timeline, we find the same thing. Major changes happen. There is both incremental change and breakthroughs that happen in their experience. There's really no conflict between incremental change and breakthroughs. Both are important in communities. You implement breakthroughs one step at a time, but I think a key point is that incremental change may not get us to breakthroughs. So breakthrough thinking is an important element in asset-based development. Breakthrough is an advance, a discovery, and innovation. It's a leap forward. When we see breakthroughs in communities, they serve as catalysts. They change the rules for success. They do things that everyone knows cannot be done. Breakthroughs are all around us. They have real and major impacts. They almost always come from leveraging, connecting, or transforming assets. So here's an exercise. Think of your own community or region, organization, or career, perhaps a community you've worked with, and use the chat feature and send us all an email with your breakthrough. When we work with communities, we
this is part of what we do is we have them identify their history, and they identify breakthroughs that have happened in the community. You go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead with a presentation, and then we'll have a chance to look at what you share with us. These are some examples of breakthroughs. A 4-minute mile, turning low-income kids from single-parent families into academic stars, which is a school in the Delta, Arkansas Delta, raising rice in Arkansas, revitalizing downtown Little Rock. And there are many examples in the private sector as well. But one of the realities is everybody knew you couldn't do these things before they were done, so they represent real breakthroughs. Questions that we often ask in a community: what is working well in your community? What assets do you have, and how can you leverage them? What would a breakthrough look like here? So that breakthrough thinking is important. If we were all in a big room, we'd break into small groups and go through this leveraging asset. These are assets that are common in many communities. And so I just want to share with you what are some breakthroughs of how to leverage, connect, and transform these assets. These are arts and crafts. Many of you know this story. Becky Anderson in North Carolina created Handmade in America, which led to leveraging the assets of artisans in Western North Carolina to market their products, to create tours where people would come and see their studios. It just has had a huge impact. And so the creative economy in North Carolina now exceeds that of tobacco in North Carolina. We have a similar initiative here in Arkansas. What about history and stories as assets that you can leverage? The Shepherd of the Hills is a book. It's a story about a family in the Ozarks of Missouri, and that led to a book and an outdoor amphitheater and the show. That was instrumental in Branson becoming one of the family tourist destinations in the whole country, and now 7 million people a year go to visit Branson. So it shows the power of history and stories. In North Carolina, there's a landfill. The methane is collected and used to heat a community college for glass blowing, pottery kilns, and so forth. It's an incredible example of using assets and leveraging for real economic development. If you have produce growers or the potential for that in your community, the local foods movement is a huge opportunity. And as gas prices continue to go up and energy prices go up because of peak oil, we're going to see more and more of this, and it's a tremendous opportunity to leverage assets within your community or region. This is a shot from Harrison, Arkansas. It's a pilot community we're working with. We're working with a partner who's an architect, and so he's helping people to envision what their community could look like. This is sidewalk art. You just have an artist to create art that is so compelling that people would want to come and to see it. This is a vacant lot in Russellville, Arkansas, and you can see what happens when you transform that asset into something that's very attractive. Many of you have probably been to San Antonio. One individual, an architect, had a vision for transforming the river, controlling the river flow into an arts and entertainment district. And that's the Riverwalk, and that's one of the key reasons that San Antonio is a #1 tourist destination in Texas. So we're talking about breakthroughs that have huge economic impact, and it always comes back to leveraging assets. Many states have watermelon. We have watermelon growers. Hope, Arkansas is the home of Bill Clinton, by the way. But to take it further, what about watermelon art? And if you really want to get out of the box or in the box, we go to Japan, and we discover that they grow square watermelons that sell for $85 a piece. How's that for value added? I want to share with you the Breakthrough Solutions model. I think we need to consider new approaches to move from SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to SOAR. SOAR is now being used by John Deere and Company on the international level and other private sector corporations. SOAR is how do you start with strengths and assets to create opportunities for breakthroughs, to realize your aspirations and visions with results you can measure. Here's our breakthrough solutions model. We start with the community and see what is their history. Why was the community formed? What is the history and the breakthroughs that have happened? What are the assets they have in their community? What are breakthrough strategies? What are the opportunities for breakthroughs that they can use to realize their vision for a vibrant and sustainable future, to realize results that you can measure? Here's an asset. We go through an asset mapping process. Here are 6 different categories. We build on the wonderful work from community capitals of Mary and Neil Flora and Jan Flora. We also map those for a community, for a region, state, and national levels. So here's a breakthrough solutions model. Then we identify what are the key drivers that are critical that will impact the future of the community. Key drivers are forces or trends that are likely to directly impact your community's future. Local leadership obviously is critical at the local level. Major economic bases at the local or regional level, and of course at the state, national, and global level, you get into winds of change that impact the community. Finally, we add the celebration, reflection, and revision, which makes a way to make this recycle. It's a continuous process. We've developed a roadmap, which is a worksheet, and we have folks fill this out. We go through this process. I want to share with you, so here are the assets down here. These are different strategies we've learned, we've discovered as a way to leverage those assets. Think of it as a football game. This is your team here, and this is a playbook, and there's everything from diamonds in the rough to road trips to regional development, systems approach, out-of-the-box thinking, to create a breakthrough through the line to get a field goal or a touchdown. I want to give you an example. Eastern downtown Little Rock looked like this 20 years ago. High crime area, a lot of vacant buildings. This was one of the buildings. The city fathers and mothers and other key leaders came together. They created the Little Rock River Market, which is a wonderful facility that's become a catalyst. The farmers market is there. It's become a catalyst for development. It was instrumental in attracting the Clinton Presidential Library, attracting major private sector investment with several high rises. It's also attracted a lot of community events. The investment in this area has gone up to $2 billion, that's with a B, because of the breakthrough solution of that river market facility. Former mayor of Little Rock, Jim Daly, we shared with him the breakthrough solutions process, and he said that's essentially the process we went through, although we didn't call it that. And then he identified different breakthroughs that have happened in their whole process. We have a newsletter. If you're interested, be sure to send us. Let's take a look at the chat, see what were some of the breakthroughs that you all identified. Greater appreciation for assets. In Fulton County, Nature Conservancy is a breakthrough. That's wonderful. Another example is a hometown connection from Kathy creating a small manufacturing plant or connecting in Canton, which is a breakthrough. Survey of our young people identified reasons why they moved here. Jim Rezick said the Kentucky projects and Ron Hustedy's program, those are terrific. By the way, one of our tools was we did a community survey, and that was instrumental in building legitimacy in the community. I want to close with showing this graphic here. This shows a grandfather showing his grandson his vision for a vineyard. I think that's our job, is to, first of all, become knowledgeable how to create a vision of a greater future and economic development opportunities that reflect the real opportunities that come with leveraging assets, and to equip people and communities with this ability to leverage assets and to create breakthroughs for a vital future. Well, it's been great to be with you. I want to introduce our next speaker, Paul LaChapelle, talking about the Montana Horizons program. Paul.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. I hope you can hear me okay. I also I note that we need to wrap up by 1 o'clock Eastern and 2 Central, so I'm going to go through my presentation kind of quickly so that we have plenty of time for questions and follow-up. Again, I'm part of a team that worked on the Montana Horizons program, and I'll explain that program in detail now. This is a program that's funded by the Northwest Area Foundation. It's a 7-state program. It's been in existence for about, we're going into our 7th year now. It's involving over 260 communities across those 7 states. And the focus, as was mentioned earlier, is on building community capacity to address poverty. The key question that we ask these communities is, how can we build a prosperous community where everyone has a chance to thrive? So again, this is a program focusing on poverty, but it's an inclusive program where we're really trying to draw on the diverse assets in the community and elements in the community so that we can address poverty very broadly. The program, as I mentioned, focused on the Northwest Area Foundation's area, which is the 8-state area. Oregon is the one state that chose not to participate, and the extension offices across the 7 states were the delivery organization. You can see the distribution of communities across this area, and this is a program that functioned in several different phases. You can see the map title at the top, phase 1, 2, and 3. So incrementally, we reached out to some certain communities, and then we expanded to more communities and more communities, again, eventually reaching over 260 communities across the 7-state region. You can see across Montana the distribution of communities, and again, Montana being the 4th largest state in the Union, we did considerable travel. Based in Bozeman, where myself and my colleagues are, we traveled through all corners of the state, including many of the Indian reservations, to implement this program. The program functions across 4 different phases, and the real strength of this program is that we're training community members to actually facilitate the program. So it's the community members themselves that are leading the charge. So we're not coming in as experts from the university or our extension agents in the communities leading the charge, but rather we're training community members to facilitate these different components of the program and form steering committees and eventually bring about some actions that address poverty in their communities. The first phase of the program involves study circles. You can see there's a number of thresholds that the Northwest Area Foundation had asked that we maintain in order for the community to move on. So there were a certain number of individuals that had to participate in this segment of the program before they moved on to the next segment. I'll go through these 4 segments one by one now. The first is study circles. We had 5 sessions. The first session is where we get people to get them together to talk about how they're connected to each other in the community and to poverty. The second session, we asked them to talk about what does poverty look like here. The third session, we asked them to consider why is there poverty in the community. The fourth session, they talk about reaching their vision, so identifying a vision in the future and to reduce poverty. And then the fifth session focuses on what action specifically will they take to address poverty. So over the course of these 5 sessions, which were about 2 to 3 hours each, again, we have community members that are leading these sessions. These are coordinated study circle sessions that are devised by this organization called Everyday Democracy. You can see the website there. This is a great resource for any of you that are interested in getting people together to talk about difficult issues, and they actually have these study circles guides that are available free of charge, that are downloadable from their website, covering topics as diverse as addressing racism, poverty, as was the case across the 7 states, addressing economic development issues, a host of diverse topics that they'll cover. The next phase of our program was a leadership development program. There were 9 phases to this. I won't go through these in detail, but you can see again focusing on both individual and collective leadership qualities, focusing on how to address conflict, and eventually leading to action steps in the community. There was a community visioning stage next, the third stage of the program, where we talk and lead the community through a series of conversations about where are they now, where are they going, where do they want to be, how do they get there, and are they getting there, how to implement and monitor. This is based largely on the work that Stephen Ames has done, and you can see the citation there at the bottom of that screen. And then lastly, the last phase is a community action phase where folks actually implement the plans that they've talked about, and there were a number of amazing programs that I'll talk about that were implemented in the communities. Another integral part of the program was the communications that took place, not just within the communities, but between all of the communities and between all of the states. We had an active blog site where community members would contribute photos, stories, video of what was going on in their communities. And you can see some of the examples. This is just one community, Anaconda, a small community in Montana that started a community foundation, eventually raised over $70,000 for that community foundation. And most of the communities, incidentally, did start a community foundation. We're very successful in raising private funds and donations for those community foundations. Again, more examples, medical transportation group, home fix-it group, cleanup committees, tree planting. Another community started nature trails. Community information was very popular in all of the communities, as well as, again, beautification programs. We had a number of communities starting farmers markets, community gardens, food banks, youth clubs, several communities focused on medical needs and medical clinics within their communities. So great examples of plans and actions being taken in those communities. If I can just sum up some of the key points and elements that contributed to success, I would sum them up in these 5 bullets. The first was that we actually had a community coach. Oftentimes it was the extension agent, but in several communities it was just a community member who served as the individual, as the point person who would keep the momentum going. They were a neutral facilitator, but they were more than a facilitator. They were an individual that actively kept steering committees on task, kept the program moving forward, and were generally the catalyst for moving the entire program forward. Secondly, ownership, as we've mentioned before, the fact that communities really were largely responsible for program design and implementation within the parameters that the foundation laid out, but it was really up to them to decide, excuse me, how to implement the program and what the final outcome would be. So, leading to the third point, tremendous amount of flexibility in these communities about how they would design their programs, their meetings, their community gatherings, the visioning exercises, and eventually the action plans that they would implement. We allowed a tremendous amount of flexibility for those communities. We also actively promoted communication amongst the communities where they would share what was going on in their communities through the blogs, etc., so that they could learn about a food bank in one community or a farmer's market in another and share the information about how they went about implementing those action plans. And then lastly, the use of technologies. Yeah, go ahead.
There was a question about the average population of these communities.
Great question, thanks. The foundation stipulated that the community population had to be less than 5,000 and with a poverty rate of more than 10%. For the majority of the communities in Montana, the vast majority were under 500 people. So these are very small communities, and many of the communities were in the eastern part of the state where they're experiencing a dramatic outmigration, particularly of youth in those communities. So they were quite small communities. The last bullet point, again, is use of technologies. We regularly used webinars, the blogs that I shared with you as a way to keep people in communication with each other. Here's my contact information, and be happy to entertain questions if any of you have them down the road. So with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker, who will provide a summary of the content today.
I think that's you, Mary.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to have you on this call. I can tell from the list of people who are participating that a lot of you have quite a bit of experience in community change work, and we invite you to kind of participate along with us in building a community of practice around this work. I think the whole issue of community change is now becoming more important in many different ways because communities are finding themselves facing intractable problems. Many communities, cities, counties, and states are facing serious budget crunches. Some of them have issues with infrastructure and they need to build additional capacity. Others of them are losing their place in the global economy and have to restructure their local economy. And a lot of them are facing...
Mary, could you move closer to your microphone? People are having a little bit of difficulty hearing you.
Okay. Does that help?
A little bit.
Okay. Sorry. Anyway, so communities have a lot of issues that they're facing, so more and more people are interested in how do communities make change and how do they make change that's successful. Encourage people to go ahead and put questions into the chat box if you have them. We have a couple of minutes left for questions. So I just want to let you know that there are a number of different groups looking at this question. The community change informal COP we have, and there is also an e-extension group on rural capacity that overlaps with our group, the Aspen Institute, the Tamarack Institute, the Southern Rural Development Center is looking at leadership impact. The Ford Family Foundation is also looking at program evaluation, and internationally there are others who are also looking at community change. And we've already talked about what the key learnings are here, but for us, one of the key questions is how does these kinds of findings fit into the current funding stream? If it's true that everywhere we have had people participate, people say one size doesn't fit all. You can't come in here with evidence-based program that has these 5 steps that go this way. You need to come in here and work with us on finding out what our assets are and how to build on them. So how do we go to the funders and say, we don't have 5 steps that we want to work with the community on, we have a strategy. And can we begin to assemble data to support evidence-based strategies as opposed to programmers? How can we make this information more accessible to policymakers? So what's next? We have 2 polls here. The first, number 2 is how useful this information was to you. That's kind of feedback for us about who's interested in this kind of material and these kinds of research and practice projects. And poll number 3 is Scott's on how well the webinar proceeded. So if you'd like to go ahead and do those polls, that would be terrific. We also invite you to take about 2 minutes and go to the SurveyMonkey link that you see here and give us your feedback on what you think is important to successful community change. We will have 2 other webinars following up from this one. The first one will be sometime in March, and we'll focus on 3 different approaches. And the second one will be late March or early April, and we'll focus on strategies for measuring successful community change. So we want to thank everyone for participating. We hope that you'll join us for the rest of our 2 webinars, and We will also be in the CDS RSS conference in Boise in July, and there'll be several sessions there that will also focus on community change.
Okay, I've opened the second webinar as well. The questions are structured a little bit differently between the two. The first one is check one of the 6 responses, and then the second one, you should go through each question and decide whether it's true or not. So you might check all 7, or only 1, or none of them, depending on how you feel about various things. I want to thank everyone for being involved with us today. It was a very interesting set of information, and I can see a number of ways that this could be applied within the extension system. So I want to thank the team. It was great, and we're pretty close to being on time. I would encourage folks to go ahead, and if you've got a moment to and you've got questions, the chat is the way to do that, and I think the presenters are happy to answer questions that you've got, and maybe you could, if possible, direct it to a particular presenter so that we know who should be answering it. It looks like activity has ceased on poll number 2, so I'll close that. And then just bring this one more to the center so that people can answer that one if they would. And there, Dan Call had asked for a link to where the webinar archive will be posted, so I'll put that up as we're speaking here so that people can have the actual link. It usually takes about a day or so to get it up, but it should be up there by tomorrow, close of business for folks. So okay, so that's posted there, so folks can take a look at that. And I think people are excited about some of the ones that are coming up, so please pay attention to those dates when they get announced. Okay, and I think it looks like activity has ceased on the summary webinar evaluation poll, so I will close that one as well and move that off. We're getting a lot of thank yous on the chat, and so I guess everyone who's got a question has already asked it, so I think we can go ahead and close the webinar. And again, thanks very much to the presenters today. It was a great set of material, and I think gave everybody something to think about.